3 years ago, I was reading an excellent book by Boris Berman with the title The Notes from the Pianist's Bench. And in one of the chapters, he was discussing the inspiration and how it is impossible for us to always feel inspired whenever we are practicing or performing a piece of music. Similarly, he was saying that we don't need to wait for a performance in order to get this sense of being one with a piece of music or feeling inspired. Because in the end, well, what if we are too nervous? Or similarly, if we don't, his argument is that if we don't practice this inspiration, if we don't nurture our soul in the practice room, then the likelihood of this magic to take place on the stage is not very high. We perform the way we practice. So his remedy to all of this was something that he called technique of the soul. The idea that we need to train our soul, we need to train our emotional world in the practice room. And by doing that, we can get closer to something that on a surface level, I would call an inspiration on call or inspiration on demand. In that same chapter, he made a number of references to work by Stanislavski and his actor's system, or the acting method. What Berman called technique of the soul, Stanislavski called the psychotechnique. And this is one of the translated volumes. Actually, it consists of 2 of the original volumes from Stanislavski. Back 3 years ago, that chapter from Boris Berman's book got me really interested in the subject, and so I read 2 volumes in Russian that Stanislavski wrote in the 30s. He wrote a total of maybe 8 or 10 quite thick volumes on acting, on his life and life in the theater, including, toward the end, he wrote a book on opera. I look forward to discovering that in more detail over the summer. The point being is that later past year I got extra curious, and that's when I acquired that thick black book and started my conversion of the acting system to musicians, to instrumentalists like myself, especially since we perform mainly absolute pieces of music, and that is music that doesn't have any explicit meaning or story behind it. Hello, my name is Alexander Polyakov, and welcome to the new video series that will provide a close and rather unusual look into the applicability of Stanislavski acting system to the world of classical musician who is performing on the instruments. There can be many answers to the question why to go through all this extra work or extra conversion or essentially recreating the bicycle wheel. And one of the core answers is that I believe that performing music is much more than just playing what is written on the page. And in fact, if we reduce our performance to just the simple act of recreating what is on the page, even while experiencing and expressing the emotions, then we are much less likely to have an impactful experience or process, if we're talking about practicing, or performance, both for ourselves and the audience members. Like many others, I believe that composers were unable to write down everything they perhaps intended to using the notation system. So, therefore, one needs to come up with a series of questions to ask oneself and different algorithms in order to get closer to understanding of what is written between the notes or between the lines. And acting system provides a recipe after recipe, step-by-step instruction of what needs to be done in order for our nature, our intuition, to come forward and inject the life and multiple dimensions into a relatively cold and certainly flat piece of sheet on which we will find the notes. It's also true for tablets. It's equally flat. I am convinced that by blending those two worlds, the world of acting and music performance, specific to myself, the instrumental music performance, and then applying those principles that Stanislavski was developing for actors, this process will not only improve, enrich, deepen the way we approach learning and interpreting piece of music, it certainly can also improve the way we connect with the audience as we perform music. Ultimately, I believe that by having this more organic, natural bond and personal bond connection to the piece of music that we study and perform, or as Boris Berman puts it, by having a complete emotional identification with the piece, we will be able to create a much stronger shield or shelter against performance anxiety. How? You might be thinking. By completely immersing ourselves into the art and having our thoughts and feelings being taken by the poetic actions and tasks of the piece. In other words, performance anxiety will become much more invisible and much less in the way, as we will be able to shift our focus from our persona onto why and what are we trying to convey through every note on our instrument, and what are we trying to communicate to the audience, and then how is that going to impact them. A few brief words about the system itself. At its core, the Stanislavski system is about authenticity. It's about emotional truth and the psychological depth of the character. And one of the ultimate goals is to create a genuine connection with the audience. As I was saying, an objective that is equally critical in music as well. Stanislavski's system emerged at the turn of the centuries, right between the 19th and 20th century in Russia, and it was a reaction to uninspired and formulaic state of theater. Actors' work, or actors' profession back then, was characterized by cliched traditions and superficial performances. He sought to revolutionize actor training with his inner technique, emphasizing psychological depth and the pursuit of inner truth over the prevailing self-centered or audience-pleasing approaches. He created his initial version of the system in 1909, which was influenced by French psychologist. In part, it was influenced by French psychologist Théodule Ribon and his concept of affective memory, which was later adapted by Stanislavski into emotional memory. Now, although emotional memory was later revised and out of his system in 1933, the principle that simple physical actions can evoke emotions remained central. This underscores the interconnectedness of internal experiences and their physical manifestations, suggesting, in short, that focusing on conscious actions will allow us to create through our nature and intuition. Stanislavski's realization that physical and psychological aspects of performance are interdependent and should be developed simultaneously offers a very valuable perspective. Just as actors integrate internal and external work from the outset, we, musicians, must delve into the reasoning, context, and emotional underpinnings of the music from the initial stages of our interaction with the score, if we want to genuinely convey it to the audience, of course. And it is perhaps fair to say that we musicians focus intensely on technical execution and expressive elements of the piece without spending as much time on exploring the motivations behind the notes or how to deliver that content, that subtext, subcontent, to the audience. For classical musicians, one of the many challenges of performing absolute piece of music lie in the fact that we need to convey a story and emotion using a very abstract art form. And this is where Stanislavski technique can be very helpful, as by adapting and incorporating, applying these acting techniques into music interpretation, instrumentalists can explore deeper dimensions in the musical pieces, and then eventually and essentially coming up with our own system, our own proven ways of how to go beyond the notes and uncover historic, political, cultural, personal, psychological narratives that are often hidden in the music. In the next video, I will briefly mention some of the core elements of the system among many others that we will be exploring in the future videos. Thank you for watching. I look forward to see you in the next video, and as always, happy learning and happy practicing.